Welcome to the Dayspring College Podcast. I am so glad that you are listening with us today. I have an incredibly special guest, one certainly near and dear to my heart, my good friend, Paul Thomas Baker. What is up, Paul Thomas?
What's up, man? It is just so much fun to be able to do this. We've talked about this for a long time, so it's been really fun just to make it a real thing. For those of y'all who don't know me, my name is Paul Baker. I'm a junior at South, and I've had the privilege to be friends with Chandler for a really long time. So
it's true. Friends when he couldn't look me in the eye, and then friends when he could look me in the eye, and then friends where I look up to him.
That is true. It's been a really good progress.
all across the spectrum. It's been exciting and a fun time. I even got to teach you in high school a little bit.
You did, and I apologize for that. But yeah.
That's just honest right there, folks. That's all that is. Paul is with us today. Super exciting. We always have a good time when we hang out. So we've been studying the book of Philippians, and we're in Philippians chapter 2, and we're looking at verses 17 and 18. And so I'm going to go ahead and read them, and then we're going to talk through them, break them down, and Paul and I are going to go over a couple of questions that I think will help you and encourage you today. So, verse 17. Even if I am able to be poured out as a drink offering upon the sacrificial offering of your faith, I am glad and rejoice with you all. Likewise, you also should be glad and rejoice with me. And so remember, this is Paul writing to the church in Philippi, and he's using some kind of different language. It's pretty Old Testament language about a drink offering and being poured out. And so kind of before we get into the Q&A, the discussion part, Paul, let me just lay some groundwork for this sacrificial language to catch anybody up. So in the Old Testament, there were times when you would go into the temple and you would literally take a cup with you, and generally it was oil or wine or something like that, and you would pour it out over the offering and on the altar, and that was your offering. What's interesting is this language is then used again by Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, probably more closely to what Paul means. And he says, Lord, if this cup would pass from me. And what he was referencing was the cup of wrath that God was going to pour out on Christ as he hung on the cross. And so Paul's bringing that language forward and saying, okay, I see my life as an offering that is being poured out for a purpose. And so that's kind of where we're going to go and how we're going to connect these things. So as he says, even if I am to be poured out as a drink offering upon the sacrificial offering of your faith. Paul, when we think about sacrifice, what are some things that come to your mind, whether that's biblical or personal?
At first, I would say we want to view it as us giving something up, or almost of a burden.
Yeah.
And I think that it's cool that you just referenced the sacrifice of Jesus and whatnot, that he was going to give the most important thing he could give, and that was his life, and he did not give it out of this
bitterness,
sense of bitterness or or that I don't want to do this, but out of love and caring for the people that he wanted to save.
Yeah, I love that, because especially I just go back to the garden, because this is I think where Paul is pulling from pretty easily, that there was a willingness, and we talked about that last week as we were studying Philippians, that he humbled himself and submitted himself to God. And especially here in 17, what Paul's hoping that I think an astute reader like we're trying to do connects is, he's said previously in chapter 1, for me to live is Christ and to die is gain. So for Paul to live means that he's going to sacrifice his life just like Jesus did. Yep. And again, bringing kind of that Old Testament language forward, and then even referencing the garden is really what he's trying to do. And then he kind of, again in 17, continuing, poured out as a drink offering, talking about his life being poured out upon the sacrificial offering of your faith. Now, this is really interesting because it takes us straight back to a reason why Paul was writing this letter, which a big part of it was not just to encourage the Philippians, but the Philippians had sent him gifts while he was in prison to encourage him and to help him kind of get through that time. And so that's what Paul is referencing there from a historical perspective, that sacrificial offering of their faith. It was that the Philippians had collected collected their, pooled their money together and really kind of sent a love offering to Paul, if you want to call it that, or a gift to Paul. And so that's a part of his motivation for writing this letter. And so it's kind of neat that he compares his life to this drink offering, but that he's willing to pour it out because he's been so encouraged by the sacrifice that the Philippian church has made for him. So it's kind of neat to be able to collect both of those things together. And so the sacrifice that was made by those in Philippi was sent to Paul as a gift, and Paul is mentioning that their sacrifice has placed him in the position of being poured out, that he can do that because he's so encouraged. So when Paul talks about that sacrifice and being poured out and being encouraged, what are some things, Paul, that maybe encourages you to sacrifice? You said it was kind of a burden, that when you think about sacrifice, you're giving something up. What are some things that encourage you to do that in your own life?
I would say, I think it's really cool to look at people who you look up to, and people who have a influence on your life, and when you see them, sacrificing, it makes it so much easier for you, because for me, when I see somebody with a family and kids giving up time and doing something, it makes it way easier for me, who I don't really have that many obligations right now, so right. I can just go and do it, and if they're able to do it, then I'm also able to do it.
I love that watching somebody else seemingly sacrifice more certainly draws you into that. Yeah, I think that's right on point with what Paul is kind of reminding the Philippians of as well. And what's so cool is the sacrifice part there is then rolled right into at the end of verse 17 with Paul saying, "I'm glad to do it, and I rejoice with you all." He's celebrating with the Philippian church that they were able to give a gift, but also that he's been able to pour himself out as a sacrifice for them. And that's just a cool thing. Paul was willing to spend his life for the Philippians. I love the idea of pouring out. It's not something that you can take back, when you pour something out. And so Paul was saying that, I'm willing to spend my life for you, for the Philippians. Paul, even now, what are some things you feel like you're willing to spend your life on, or maybe even some things you've spent your life on that maybe you wish you wouldn't have?
Yeah, so I would say, for me, I've had a lot of really cool chances to do things, serve in different areas, go on mission trips, and then go to JH, and those opportunities have given me avenues to serve, and through that I've been able to give, but I've also been able to be poured into. And I think that's really important to me, is finding ways that I can help others, but also I can learn valuable stuff in the process. Yeah,
you make a great point with being poured into, because it might be easy to hear Paul okay, I'm being poured out as a drink offering. You need to sacrifice your life, and certainly that is a part of our Christian walk. But that's not without also being poured into. The best way that this goes is that you're being poured into just personally through your time with the Lord, as well as maybe someone discipling you or mentoring you, being a part of a community of Christians, and then you're pouring your cup out as it's being filled too, and kind of working its way down. And I know you've had some seasons where that's worked really well, and then some seasons where you were like, bro, there's nothing in my cup.
Yeah.
I'm pouring out of nothing right now.
Yeah, no. I would say there definitely has been times in my life to where through giving so much and not being poured into, it kind of has caused a dry season.
Yeah.
And I think that it's really important to notice that early, instead of noticing it late, because later you get into it, the more it becomes your normal.
Yeah.
And once you set a dry season as your expectations, as your walk with Christ, it's just going to become normal to you.
That's such a good word, because you're right. If you get a dry season, you can convince yourself that this is how it's supposed to be. And it's not. God never intended it to be that way. He always intended you to be a part of a community, a part of a group of believers that are pouring into you, so that as you pour out, it's almost like your cup will never run out, because you're always being poured into. That's such a good word. And what's cool about that is it leads us right into 18, the end of 17 and 18, because Paul goes from sacrifice to rejoicing. Just boom, boom, which I love that, because it's a great reminder to us that while we can talk about the Christian life and the Christian faith as a life that calls us to sacrifice, it's not without joy. It's not like we're always pouring out and it's just woe is me and this is so hard, but there's full of joy. I mean, Paul says it, I am glad that I'm being sacrificed and rejoice with you all, meaning that he's glad he's being sacrificed and he expects the Philippians to be pouring themselves out and rejoice in that. And then in 18, he's likewise, you also should be glad and rejoice with me. So have you experienced that before, Paul? You kind of get to a season where you've been pouring yourself out, sacrificing, but yet you've been able to rejoice in that same moment as well. Have you ever experienced that?
Yeah, I would say I think it's really like easy to see that whenever you're like pouring yourself out and you're getting like wins for the kingdom.
Oh, yeah.
I think like, when you're like out sharing, your faith and your testimony and people start, changing their lives and people start, getting baptized, like it's really easy for us then. But then like when you're out there and, we, had this opportunity when we went to New Orleans to go, minister to like this Vietnamese community. And like, it was really challenging because like, I mean, honestly, we didn't see a lot of wins like there.
Yeah.
Like the language barrier was really hard. So like, like at that time, like we knew that like we were doing something like really good for the kingdom, but it was really hard because like we didn't see stuff like right there.
Yeah, and what was crazy about that, I remember that Saturday we're kind of like doing yard work and like handing out these magazines. We have no idea what they say because they're written in Vietnamese, but we're helping Jason Bedell, who is one of our church planting partners here in New Orleans, and then we get there Sunday, and like Jason's a boss, by the way. That guy preached half his sermon in Vietnamese, and then the other half he would like translate it in English on the fly. It was so sick. And then afterwards we stayed and hung out, and we just get to rejoice in what went on. And while that felt like a kind of a small sacrifice, even though, let's be honest, some of those showers at the place we stayed, a little bit cringy, right? Yeah. You just wear the flip-flops. Amen. Yeah. Just wear the flip-flops, okay? Just saying. And so, being able to rejoice with him, though, yeah, that's so cool, because that's where that idea was taking me in my head as I was thinking back to like, yeah, we're pouring out, but getting to celebrate with Jason and just be so encouraged by his sacrifice and our just small, few hours during that weekend time. That was awesome. Well, now as we kind of draw to a close, Paul, it's time for the marination moment. Now, I know that let me say I know. I think that you love the marination moment, but you're not convinced of it yet. So love it, hate it. I'm going to give you a space to express how you feel about the marination moment.
Like, I really hate it. Like, we took a poll in our Sunday school class at Day Spring this past Sunday, and the only person who liked it is Dean. So like, I don't know if y'all like made it together and like that's why you like it, but like nobody else likes it. Well,
so we talked about this earlier, okay, confession here. And so here's the deal. If you have a better suggestion, you, Paul, or anyone else, feel free to DM us. But until that day, it'll be marination moment, because the goal is we're trying to get more scripture in your head than comes out. And that's exactly what marination does. It gets the flavor in, Paul. Locks it in.
I hate that.
So what is one truth, one principle that you learned today that you can think deeply on? Here's my marination moment, and then I want to hear your marination moment, okay? All right. Here's my marination moment. I want to consider my life as a sacrifice and spend my time for something. Primarily that's something being the glory of God. But I want to consider my life as a sacrifice and spend my time for something. Paul, what's your marination moment?
Yeah, so my meditation moment for the week would be just like knowing who like I have like a influence over, I would say, and like knowing what group of people like I'm trying to reach, and just like finding ways that like I can help them, like bear burdens or like, give like sacrificially. And like it could be really big stuff, but it could also just be like little stuff, like having like conversations when they have a bad day or whatnot. So I think just like looking for opportunities like that throughout the week.
Yeah, looking for opportunities to pour yourself out. I love that. That's a good word. Paul, thank you so much for being with us today. As always, your presence encourages my heart. Listener, thank you so much for being with us. I would encourage you to follow us at Dayspring College, participate in the conversation on our social media, and I pray that you have an absolutely blessed rest of your day.